Hi, I'm Dr. Erin Williams, Director of Writing and Assistant Professor in the Department of English and Foreign Languages at the University of St. Francis in Fort Wayne, Indiana, and you're watching another USF Plus Writing video tutorial. In this video, we're going to be talking about quotation integration commandments. Okay, maybe not commandments, maybe more like guidelines. But regardless, we're going to be learning about some of the ways that first-year writing students in particular make mistakes with quotation integration. And we're just going to be focusing on quotations, but some of this information could also be applied to summaries and paraphrases as well. So the sample quotations we're going to be using will come from this article. I found it on JSTOR. You're welcome to go look it up for yourselves if you want. Okay, guideline number 1. Quotations can't stand alone as their own sentences in your paper, except sometimes they can. It's just that that's a move that's usually used by people who are a little bit more advanced in their writing. So if you're a first-year writing student, my recommendation is that you never let quotations stand on their own as sentences in your papers. But just be aware of the fact that if you read scholarly articles or if you're just reading newspaper articles or magazine articles, you're going to be encountering quotations that stand on their own as sentences. So it's not as if this is written in stone someplace, but for first-year writers, it's generally my recommendation that you don't let quotations stand on their own as sentences. Okay, here's an example. I'll let you press pause and read over this example briefly. You see how that quotation stands on its own as a sentence? There are no other words from the writer of this student paper to contextualize that quotation. There's just somebody else's words hanging out as their own sentence in this student writer's paper. This is what we call an orphan quotation. That means it's not got a parent, it's not owned by anything, it's hanging out by itself alone in the big bad world of your paper. And without something to contextualize it, it's not very clear about where exactly it belongs. That poor orphan quotation, okay? It needs a family, it needs context, okay? There are lots of different ways you can give this poor little orphan quotation a context. One way to do that is to use a signal phrase. This is a very basic signal phrase. So a signal phrase is just kind of, what we mean by that is just that you've got some words that are your words that have been used to contextualize or to integrate a quotation into your sentence. Okay, so this is supposed to be your sentence. It's your paper. We as academic readers are here to read your ideas. And that's part of why a signal phrase is so important. We want to know where you come in. How are you setting up the idea that was explained in this quotation? Okay, so again, just a very basic signal phrase. This is not the only way to do this. You can have another kind of signal phrase that comes after the quotation. For example, note that you want to keep the parenthetical citation with the information that it cites, not your further analysis or contextualization. If you put the parenthetical citation at the very end of this sentence, that would suggest that this Lantry person had also written the information that comes after what's in quotation marks, namely that spacesuits from other space programs and periods of history are a further example. At any rate, he didn't exactly say that. And so I don't want to attribute that to him. I just want to attribute the quotation to him. So I keep that quotation nice and close, or I keep the parenthetical citation nice and close to the quotation. Okay, I'll go ahead and press the pause button at any time if you want to take a closer look at how I've set up that signal phrase. Here's another signal phrase, and this signal phrase doesn't just use your words to integrate the quotation into your sentence, right? Your being the student writer here. It also signals the source of this information. So I've taken the name of the author and, for the sake of APA citation, the year of the publication outside of the parenthetical citation. and I've used it as part of my signal phrase to indicate where this quotation came from. Note that I did not change the capitalization of this initial letter of the word the. That's because that's how it originally appears in the article. Right? You don't want to demote capitalization. And that's what I would be doing if I were to make it look exactly like it were if those were my words and this weren't a quotation. But it is a quotation, and I don't want to demote the capitalization. I'm going to be true to the formatting. And note, too, that all I have in that parenthetical citation is the page number. I don't have his last name repeated. I don't have the year repeated. I just have the page number, and that's all I need. And I could rearrange that too. I could put that attribution close to the bottom. And note how the year number goes along with that parenthetical citation. I'll give you a moment. Go ahead and click pause if you want to consider how this example is different from the previous one. Okay, guideline number 2. Quotations should sound natural in your sentences. This is what my students often call flow. I'm not exactly sure what flow means all the time, but to me, I think it means, in this case, your quotations and the integration should sound natural, like natural, regular sentences. Go ahead and press pause here to take a read of this, and especially try reading the second sentence out loud. You'll note that it doesn't exactly work, does it, as a sentence? Just intuitively, it doesn't quite make sense, does it? But there are ways to adjust so that I can still have a signal phrase that provides some of the context for this quotation in a way that is grammatical. Now, this is one way that a signal phrase is used pretty commonly when people are quoting people. It's not how we might normally talk, but grammatically speaking, for setting up a quotation, it works just fine. Here's an example of something that I see pretty often in my first year writing students' papers. There's something like this. They're trying to set up a quotation. They're trying to draw our attention to the fact that this is going to be an example of that thing I was just talking about in that previous sentence. Okay, sure. But when I read it as a sentence, it doesn't make sense. What's this one example of? If this were something that I would be reading as a sentence, I'd be wondering, where is the subject of this initial clause? Okay, well, there are ways to adjust that and set it up kind of like you would be just setting up a regular quotation, right? For example, the Apollo-era spacesuit collection is an irreplaceable record of modern American technological and cultural history. Sounds like a regular sentence, right? And that's a good example of how to have sort of natural-sounding sentences when you're integrating quotations. Guideline number 3, you should clarify and justify the source of the quotation for your audience. All right, so here's an example. And again, press pause and read over this if you'd like a little bit more time to do so. This signal phrase works fine if your audience consists of experts in the field you're writing about. For first-year writing students, that's probably not the case. You're probably writing to a very broad academic audience and not a set of experts in, say, museum history or cultural history. And for that reason, this sort of contextualization, yeah, it works fine, and you'll see it in a lot of the articles that you read, because the people who are writing those articles, those scholarly articles, are writing to other scholars in their field. And normally that's okay. If you want to give a little bit more background and kind of acknowledge the fact that your readers might not know who the experts are about the subject matter that you're bringing up, you could give us a little bit more information about the author. For example, you want to give that person a full name introduction. After you give that person a full name introduction, if you were to refer to that person anymore in your paper, you would just use their last name. So from then on, it would be Lantry further says that, for example. Here's another example. This signal phrase explains not only who said this quotation or who wrote this quotation, but what the source of the quotation was. And here's yet another example. You've got the source, the full name, first time introduction of the author, and that person's credentials. There are different ways to do this. You don't always have to have all three of these things used to explain and justify the source of the quotation and make clear for your audience how this person is an expert. You could, for example, just have the credentials and the full name introduction. Guideline number 4. Quotations will require your explanation and analysis. So it's not just enough to tell us what this other person said about spacesuits. We need to see a little bit more. We need to understand a little bit more. We want to know how this quotation relates to your point. Okay, so bear with me here because the colors on the right side won't correspond to the colors on the left side. This is the introduction to your point. I'm assuming this is the first sentence of a paragraph, okay? And here's the quotation with supporting evidence from the expert, all right? Now you might want to pause here and read over the rest of the paragraph. And as you do, try to consider how the last few sentences in purple connect back with the sort of dark red and the blue. This is your analysis. This is where you bring together some of the information from the quotation and your larger point. This is where you explain to us how that quotation was relevant for your paragraph, for your point, and for your larger paper, okay? For that reason, it usually goes on for a few sentences. It's not just something that you want to rush through. You want to show us some of the details. And ideally, you'll have you'll have specifics, you'll have data. If this person had further explanations about how museums are an ideal place to preserve these particular kinds of historical artifacts, this would be a good opportunity to bring that up. For the sake of space, I did not include those sorts of things, but those are examples of specific details that I would hope I could find some more information about and use to help prove my point to my audience. As you guys read this paragraph, are you convinced that spacesuits are, it's a good idea to preserve spacesuits in museums? What kinds of specific details would you like to hear more about from that Lantry article in order to be convinced? Those are the kinds of things that you could elaborate on in this analysis part of this paragraph. Now there's one more thing I want to mention about why it's important to have analysis for your quotations. It's a good idea not to end a paragraph with a quotation. And the reason for that is that if you end a paragraph with a quotation, you've taken away your opportunity to provide us with the analysis for that quotation. Again, you'll see it happen a lot in the scholarly articles that you read for research on the various kinds of papers that you do. You'll see paragraphs end with quotations a lot. But for your sakes, it's a good idea not to do that, because that's your opportunity to explain how that information all works together. Your idea plus the quotation, how it's all working together for your paper. Okay, guideline number 5. Unless you've got an electronic source that doesn't have a page, paragraph, or section number, your in-text citations need to include numerals, okay? So this is the end of a page from the article that I took our quotations from. It's a PDF from JSTOR. See that page number? That's what needs to go in the parenthetical citations. And in fact, you can see that right there. So if you've got an electronic PDF of an article, that's what you need to include. All right, thanks for tuning in. I hope this has been helpful for you.